Berlin, Germany, the 29th of April, 1944. At 20,000 feet above the Reich capital, Luftwaffe Major Franz Dietrich stared in disbelief through his cockpit canopy. The formation of American B-17 seconds was still there, and so were their escorts. P-51 Mustangs weaved protectively among the bombers, over 500 miles beyond what German intelligence had deemed possible. The flight log recorded 1,476 miles from East Anglia bases. Fighter protection, once limited to 300 miles, now reached the heart of Germany. The strategic equation of the air war had been rewritten overnight. Before the war, Allied bombers flew unprotected beyond 300 miles. Yet today, sleek silver fighters remained alongside them all the way to Berlin. The United States Army Air Forces called it Operation Argument. German commanders named it the Black Thursday. This single mission forced Luftwaffe planners to rewrite their defensive doctrine. They had calculated a 400-mile limit for any escort fighter. By spring 1944, American fighters would routinely reach targets 850 miles from their bases. How did this transformation happen? In the offices of the 8th Air Force headquarters, mission reports revealed an alarming figure. Bomber losses on deep penetration raids exceeded 25% when unescorted. American bombing strategy, built around daylight precision attacks, faced collapse without effective fighter protection to the target and back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lieutenant General James Doolittle, the newly appointed commander of the 8th Air Force, studied combat loss charts against target priorities. Intelligence reports showed German fighters already eliminating approximately 60 bombers per mission during deep raids. The American offensive was faltering. Staff officers calculated grim arithmetic. At current loss rates, no bomber crew could statistically survive a 25-mission tour. The technology of American fighter design in 1942 resembled practices from the previous decade. Drop tanks were considered impractical. Range was sacrificed for performance. Each design followed conventional wisdom. Fighters escorted bombers for the first third of the mission, then returned home while bombers continued alone. An 8th Air Force planning memo from late 1943 stated, "At current rates, bomber forces will diminish faster than replacement aircrews can be trained." The arithmetic is simple and devastating. Germany cannot be defeated from the air without striking vital industries. Those industries cannot be reached without acceptable losses. Those losses cannot be sustained without fighter escort to the target. The contrast was stark. Germany's defensive strategy depended on a sanctuary zone beyond escort range. Luftwaffe interceptors could mass their attacks in this unprotected region. Reich industries were deliberately placed beyond the 300-mile radius. One chart on Doolittle's desk crystallized the problem. In October 1943, 60 bombers lost at Schweinfurt, representing nearly 600 men. The mission was deemed too costly to repeat without a solution to the escort problem. The technical bottleneck was clear. Fighter range required both engineering and doctrine changes. Aeronautical engineers calculated that fuel capacity would need to double or triple. Doctrines regarding reserve fuel margins would need revision. The industry had focused on speed and maneuverability during pre-war development. When war erupted in Europe, there was no surge capacity for extended-range fighters. Doolittle initiated planning for modified aircraft and expanded fuel systems. But without revolutionary changes in operational approach, the plans remained theoretical. The question was not whether extended range was possible. It was whether American engineering could reinvent fighter operations before daylight bombing became prohibitively costly. In December 1943, as bomber losses mounted and targets in eastern Germany remained untouched, the answer remained uncertain. Colonel Thomas Hitchcock was not an aircraft designer. He was a former World War I pilot and amateur polo player, known for his understanding of aerodynamics and performance. His philosophy was direct. The bomber will always get through, but not alone. When Army Air Forces representatives sought solutions to the escort problem, Hitchcock proposed something unprecedented: the marriage of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine to the North American P-51 airframe, coupled with expanded internal fuel tanks and 150-gallon drop tanks. The conference table was covered with range calculations and mechanical drawings. Hitchcock's proposal challenged every assumption of fighter doctrine. Critics within the Army Air Forces called the plan reckless. Senior pilots argued that fighters shouldn't be burdened with extra fuel; it would compromise performance and handling where it mattered most. Hitchcock's reply was blunt. "We're not building dogfighters. We're building bomber protectors." Contract specifications outlined the scope: engine replacement, fuel system expansion, streamlined design, and tactical doctrine changes. Production would be accelerated at factories in Inglewood, California. The empty factory floor would become the production center for what many were already calling the fighter that will win the war. Colonel Don Blakesley brought expertise from combat operations over Europe. At RAF Debden, his crews had flown Spitfires with limited range and witnessed firsthand the slaughter when bombers pressed on alone. The skills were transferable: fuel management, cruise control settings, formation discipline, and relentless tactical innovation. The early performance estimates seemed absurd: 1,500-mile range fighter missions. Traditional operations required a return to base with 20% fuel reserves. Blakesley proposed cutting this to 10%, accepting higher risk for greater reach. It was operational logic applied to strategic necessity. Skeptics predicted failure. The Air Force expected a 450-mile combat radius from the modified P-51B. Blakesley's first operational mission with drop tanks reached 600 miles. The result forced policymakers to re-benchmark what was possible in American fighter operations. Blakesley understood that the air war would not be won by superior aircraft alone. It would be won by superior reach, by the ability to engage the enemy over their territory, while protecting the bomber streams that carried the strategic offensive forward. Fighters were not subordinate weapons. They were the enabling platform for strategic bombing. If range could be extended, so could Allied striking power. The Air Materiel Command awarded expanded production contracts. Deliveries began immediately. P-51 groups formed in England in autumn 1943, months before Operation Argument. By the time the February 1944 offensive began, Mustang tactics were already proving themselves in practice. The general arrangement drawing spread across the engineering table at North American Aviation was labeled NA-73X, the Mustang prototype design. A rubber stamp marked it approved for modification. The P-51 was American in airframe, British in engine. The design was deliberately adapted: a low-drag wing, laminar flow airfoil, radiator positioned for aerodynamic efficiency, with a cargo capacity of 489 gallons of fuel when equipped with drop tanks. The power plant was a 1,490 horsepower Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, reliable, powerful, and fuel-efficient at high altitude. Top speed 437 miles per hour. Effective combat ceiling 41,900 feet. The revolution was not in the fighter itself, but in how it would be employed. Army Air Force tactical doctrine divided the mission into phases: climb out, cruise, combat, and return, each with specific engine settings, fuel mixture ratios, and RPM limits. Pilots followed mathematical tables that balanced range against performance. Electric fuel trim enabled precise control of mixture settings. Traditional fighters operated with generous reserve margins, sacrificing range for safety. Mustang pilots accepted tighter margins, calculating each minute of flight against gallons consumed. This operational doctrine, impossible with thirstier engines, was the key to Blakesley's range extension. Standardization extended to every system. Drop tanks were identical across all squadrons. Radio procedures were standardized for fuel state reporting. The Merlin engine could be monitored through strict cylinder head temperature protocols as a single unit. Early flight demonstrations confirmed the potential. With careful cruise control management, the P-51B achieved 2,080 miles range in ideal conditions, 4 times that of its predecessor. An archival pilot report from the 357th Fighter Group, early 1944, documented a historic shift. Accompanied bombers to Leipzig and return. Combat occurred 80 miles east of target at maximum range, landed with 45 minutes fuel reserve. Navigation procedures proved sufficient for overcast conditions. The contrast with traditional practice was absolute. In 1943, Britain's Spitfire completed approximately 150 miles of effective escort radius. By February 1944, Mustang groups would reach 850 miles. That pace, impossible by pre-war standards, would redefine the strategic balance of the air war. The first operational P-51 groups looked impressive. Their gleaming aluminum skin reflected English sunlight, their lines graceful and purposeful. Bomber crews called them little friends. Luftwaffe pilots dismissed them as unlikely threats beyond the Rhine, but in February 1944, survival to Berlin and back was the only metric that mattered. The P-51 was a weapon of arithmetic. It turned time and space into strategic advantage, and advantage into air superiority. The engineering was not revolutionary, it was evolutionary, combining existing technologies in transformative ways. An aerial map showed the transformation of escort coverage. Concentric rings spreading eastward from East Anglian bases, the 300-mile radius of Thunderbolts and Lightnings, the 850-mile reach of Mustangs. Pearl Harbor had been attacked 2 years earlier. The United States was now fully committed to strategic bombing of German industry. The 357th, 361st, and 4th Fighter Groups were operational with P-51 seconds. More were transitioning from Thunderbolts and Lightnings. The conversion accelerated as results proved the concept. Fighter Group reports documented exponential improvement. Bomber loss rates declined from 25% to under 7% when escorted by Mustangs to the target and back. Photographs from early 1944 show the human scale of the operation. Pilots in fleece-lined flight jackets studying maps that stretched to Poland, ground crews refueling aircraft in pre-dawn darkness, armourer tightening the fittings on 108-gallon belly tanks. Squadron leaders calculated flight time against fuel burn rates. The mission was deceptively simple. Stay with the bombers, whatever the cost. Major Richard Turner tracked fuel consumption on a small note card clipped to his instrument panel. Fuel management defined mission success more than combat prowess. Turner's 357th Fighter Group developed standard procedures. Maximum lean mixture at 25,000 feet, 1,700 revolutions per minute, 34 inches of manifold pressure. This produced true air speeds of 290 miles per hour, while consuming only 60 gallons per hour. The formula was discipline translated into range. By March 1944, Turner's pilots could remain aloft for over 7 hours, time enough to reach Berlin, engage in combat, and return with reserves. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On the morning of the 6th of March 1944, Major Turner led 48 Mustangs of the 357th on escort duty to Berlin. Departure time was 0710 hours. Rendezvous with the bomber stream occurred at 25,000 feet over the North Sea. External tanks were checked and monitored. Radio discipline was absolute. Every transmission cost seconds of attention, and attention was the currency of survival. 3 hours into the mission, as they crossed into German airspace, the Luftwaffe rose to meet them. Oberleutnant Hans Schmidt led 3 staffels of Bf 109 seconds from Jagdgeschwader 27, climbing to intercept the bomber stream near Hanover. Intelligence briefings had assured him the American escort would have turned back 50 miles earlier. His fighters were fueled for combat, not range fast, agile, and lethal in the unescorted zone where bombers had always been vulnerable. Schmidt spotted the lead bomber box through broken clouds and gave the attack order. His 109 seconds rolled inverted and dove toward the formation. The shock was absolute. As Schmidt's fighters approached the bomber stream, Turner's Mustangs, flying high cover, rolled in behind them. Schmidt's radio man reported with obvious alarm, "Indianer, Begleitung, Indians, escort." The term was recognition that fighters were present where none should be possible. Over open frequency, German controllers demanded confirmation. The fighter presence 600 miles from English bases contradicted every intelligence assessment. Schmidt transmitted the confirmation code indicating long-range escorts were present. The engagement lasted 16 minutes. 9 Bf 109 seconds were shot down. 4 Mustangs were lost. The bomber stream continued to Berlin with minimal losses. Boxcars arrived at Inglewood's rail sidings every hour. They carried Merlin engines from Packard, wing assemblies from Dallas, fuselage sections from secondary plants across California. A material control board in the production office tracked inbound components from 26 states. The supply chain was continental in scale. Each P-51 contained 56 pounds of rubber, 126 pounds of aluminum, 5,464 rivets, and 168 separate wiring harnesses. Prefabrication required precise quality control. Components were checked 3 times: at manufacture, at delivery, and at assembly. Army Air Force's Material Command Liaison coordinated with War Production Board expediters to prioritize shipments. Aluminum mills operated at maximum capacity. Engine production lines ran 3 shifts. Rail traffic was managed to ensure continuous flow. The entire American industrial base was synchronized to feed the fighter groups. The contrast with Axis logistics was absolute. Germany faced strategic bombing, labor shortages, and fragmented transportation. Aircraft factories were primary targets. Production was dispersed to forests, mines, and underground facilities. Material shortages became chronic. Japan confronted even worse conditions. Submarine interdiction cut off aluminum imports, and domestic production could not compensate. Both Axis powers operated under scarcity. The United States operated under abundance. Aluminum production in 1944 reached £76 million per month. Engine production exceeded 13,000 units per month. The industrial base was continental, protected by oceans, and synchronized by a command economy that prioritized air power. 8th Air Force operations summaries for April 1944 showed average bomber loss rates below 6% when escorted by P-51 seconds. That number was sustainable. Fighter groups were not operating at surge capacity. They were operating at standard capacity. The groups were designed for continuous operations at high sortie rates. Every process, from pre-flight to debriefing, was optimized for maximum time over target. Buffer stocks of aircraft absorbed combat losses. Multiple sources for critical components prevented single points of failure. The arithmetic of victory became clear. Fighter escort to the limit of bomber range equaled air superiority over Germany itself. In 1 month, the 8th Air Force could launch 20 major raids on previously unreachable targets. In 1 quarter, that meant 60 strikes at the heart of German industry. Multiply those numbers by increasing aircraft production, and German defeat became mathematically inevitable. By April 1944, the strategic bombing offensive was no longer an experiment. It was an overwhelming force. German radar operators tracked the daily incursions with increasing alarm. Allied bomber formations, once vulnerable beyond the Rhine, now arrived over targets with fighter protection intact. Luftwaffe pilot Kurt Meyer recalled, "We would hear the controllers. Large formation approaching Frankfurt, with escorts. Then, minutes later, escorts still present. Then the dreaded words, 'Escorts remain with bombers past Leipzig.' We had been promised sanctuary. There was none. In intercepted Luftwaffe communications, Allied intelligence detected growing desperation. A May 1944 German assessment stated, Enemy fighter operations now extend beyond all calculated limits. Previous defensive doctrine requires complete revision. The technological achievement was impressive, but the psychological impact was devastating. The myth of the protective sanctuary beyond escort range had collapsed. No part of the Reich was safe from escorted raids. Blakesley addressed his pilots at the 4th Fighter Group. "Your job is not to shoot down German fighters. Your job is to make sure our bombers hit their targets and come home. If that means flying 7 hours without firing a shot, that's what you'll do." The doctrine transformed fighter tactics. Pilots were evaluated not on victories, but on discipline. A successful mission meant bombers protected, not necessarily enemies destroyed. This philosophy became the foundation of a new air warfare concept, the fighter sweep. P-51 groups would deliberately fly ahead of the bomber stream, clearing the air of interceptors before the bombers arrived. This forced German fighters to engage the escorts or avoid combat entirely. Either way, the bombers reached their targets. The sweep became possible only because Mustangs had fuel to spare enough to fight, then rejoin the bombers for the return journey. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring confronted Luftwaffe commanders about the situation. "I was assured American fighters couldn't reach past Frankfurt. Now they're over Breslau." General Adolf Galland, inspector of fighters, replied with brutal honesty, "The Americans have solved their range problem. We must now solve ours." The German response was predictable but insufficient. Defensive fighter units were pulled back from the periphery to concentrate around critical industries. This created a defense in depth, but surrendered air superiority over vast areas of occupied Europe. Allied tactical air forces exploited the vacuum, attacking transportation networks with near impunity. The strategic trap was complete concentrate to defend industry and lose the transportation network, disperse to protect transportation and lose industry. Lieutenant Hans-Joachim Marseille, the Star of Africa with 158 victories, transferred from the Mediterranean to defend the Reich. His combat report after encountering P-51 seconds was terse. American fighters remained with bombers throughout engagement. Aggressive, well-flown, fuel seemed inexhaustible. Previous tactics invalid. Marseille recommended fundamental changes: dispersal of aircraft production, increased pilot training hours, and development of jet fighters. By then, it was already too late. The production gap had become unbridgeable. Major Turner's mission planning room featured a massive map of Europe. Concentric circles marked effective combat radii 400 miles for P-47 Thunderbolts, 475 for P-38 Lightnings, and 850 for P-51 Mustangs. The overlapping circles created a strategic picture. With proper basing and coordination, no part of German-controlled Europe was beyond reach. Turner's pilots trained in navigation as obsessively as gunnery. Each carried a detailed flight computer that converted fuel burn into range predictions. The discipline was mathematical: minutes, gallons, distance. The 357th Fighter Group Operations Order for the 13th of May 1944 outlined the day's mission. Escort 1st Air Division B-17 seconds to oil refineries at Merseburg-Lerna. Departing 0630 hours. Expected duration 7 hours 10 minutes. Maximum range profile. Drop tanks retained to target. Contingency landing fields marked on chart. The duration alone would have been considered impossible 6 months earlier. Now it was routine. The P-51 had not merely extended fighter range, it had redefined the strategic map. On the mission, 22-year-old Lieutenant John Godfrey managed his engine with mathematical precision. Takeoff at full rich mixture. Climb to 10,000 feet, then gradual leaning as oxygen thinned. At 25,000 feet, the mixture was set to maximum lean, the propeller to 1,700 revolutions per minute, manifold pressure to 33 inches. The combination yielded 5 gallons per hour per 100 horsepower, unprecedented efficiency for a high-performance fighter. Godfrey kept his drop tanks until combat was joined over Leipzig. When empty, he jettisoned them and switched to internal fuel. The combat occurred 765 miles from base. The engagement was brief, but decisive. 12 Bf-109 seconds from JG-27 attacked from high astern, expecting to find unescorted bombers. Instead, they encountered Godfrey's squadron flying top cover. The German formation leader, recognizing escorts where none should exist, immediately broke contact. The bomber formation continued to Merseburg unhindered. Godfrey's fuel state showed 195 gallons, remaining enough for the return journey with a 40-minute reserve. The mission lasted 7 hours 6 minutes. All Mustangs returned safely. What made this possible? Not superior aircraft, the Bf-109G and FW-190A were excellent fighters. Not superior pilots, the Luftwaffe still fielded experienced aces. The difference was systemic. The P-51 combined aerodynamic efficiency with fuel capacity and engine economy. American pilots followed strict cruise control procedures. The bomber formations maintained precise navigation. Ground crews ensured aircraft operated at peak efficiency. The entire system functioned as a coordinated whole. The sum was greater than its parts. Range became a function not of technology alone, but of disciplined operations. German planners had calculated air defense based on assumptions of limited Allied reach. They expected sanctuary beyond 400 miles from English bases. That calculation was correct for 1,943 fighter technology. It was catastrophically wrong for 1,944 operations. Space had been weaponized. The ability to escort bombers to any point in Europe was equivalent to possessing air superiority everywhere. The Mustang didn't build a new air force. It removed the geographical constraints from the existing one. In the Reich Defense Command Operations Center, a situation map displayed the reality. Red pins marked Allied fighter bases in England, Italy, and newly liberated France. Concentric circles showed the reach of different aircraft types. The P-51 circles overlapped across the entirety of German territory. No sanctuary remained. General Galland summarized the predicament. When American fighters can reach every corner of the Reich, when no target is beyond their protection, the strategic bombing campaign becomes decisive. General Doolittle received the operational analysis in June 1944. Average bomber loss rates on deep penetration raids had fallen from 25% to 2% in 4 months. Missions previously considered suicidal were now routine. Berlin, Leipzig, Breslau, Regensburg all were within reach of escorted formations. The P-51 had transformed the air war in precisely the manner Doolittle had envisioned, not by outfighting the Luftwaffe, but by outsustaining it. German fighters still won many individual engagements, but they lost the strategic contest. They could not be everywhere the bombers went. The statistics were compelling. In January 1944, before widespread Mustang operations, the 8th Air Force lost 220 bombers. By June, despite a much higher mission tempo, losses fell to 88. Crew survival rates improved dramatically. Bombardiers reported greater accuracy due to reduced defensive maneuvering. The cumulative effect was decisive. Strategic targets previously immune from precision attack now suffered systematic destruction. Oil refineries, synthetic fuel plants, aircraft factories, transportation hubs, all fell under sustained bombardment. Luftwaffe records captured after the war revealed the psychological impact. A June 1944 staff assessment stated, "Fighter Command no longer possesses the capability to prevent bomber penetrations to any target within Reich territory. The presence of escort fighters at all points along the route, including terminal targets, renders interception increasingly costly. Pilot losses cannot be sustained at current rates." The report recommended withdrawal of fighter units to preserve a cadre for future operations. The recommendation was rejected for political reasons. The result was systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe as an effective force. A Mustang pilot's survival depended on balancing contradictory demands. Fighter escort required formation discipline and fuel conservation. Combat demanded aggressive maneuvering and full power settings. Lieutenant Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group became legendary for his ability to reconcile these demands. His personal scorecard showed 22 aerial victories, yet his bomber protection record was perfect. Every formation he escorted reached its target. Gentile explained his approach: "You fight when you must, escort always, and manage fuel like your life depends on it. Because it does." Gentile's flight log from a July 1944 mission to Munich outlined the mathematics of long-range operations. Takeoff at 0610 hours with 269 gallons internal fuel, plus two 108-gallon drop tanks. Cruise settings established at 25,000 feet, 1,700 revolutions per minute, 32 inches manifold pressure, mixture set to maximum lean. Fuel consumption stabilized at 60 gallons per hour. Rendezvous with bombers at 0820 hours over the English Channel. Combat engaged at 1,105 hours, near the target 3 FW 190 seconds destroyed. Drop tanks jettisoned, return journey on internal fuel. Landing at 1,412 hours with 42 gallons remaining, 8 hours, 2 minutes total duration. Maximum range approximately 1,480 miles. What made this possible was not the aircraft alone, but the system built around it. Gentile flew a machine optimized for range. He followed operational procedures designed to maximize endurance. He was supported by weather officers who provided wind data, intelligence analysts who identified threat concentrations, and ground crews who ensured his engine performed at peak efficiency. The long-range escort was a team accomplishment. The Mustang was merely its most visible component. The contrast with Luftwaffe operations was instructive. German fighters operated from dispersed fields under increasing fuel constraints. Pilot training hours were curtailed to conserve gasoline. Mechanical reliability suffered from parts shortages. The system was degrading under pressure. Luftwaffe records show a July 1944 serviceability rate of 53% for frontline units. Barely half their aircraft were operational on any given day. American fighter groups maintained rates above 85%. The gap in operational effectiveness widened month by month. Field Marshal Erhard Milch, responsible for German aircraft production, recognized the implications. In August 1944, he wrote, "The enemy has achieved what we thought impossible: true air superiority over the entirety of the Reich. Their bombers operate with impunity. Their fighters range at will. Our production cannot compensate for losses. The air war is mathematically lost." Milch recommended radical dispersal of industry and accelerated deployment of jet fighters. The recommendation came too late. Strategic targets were already under systematic attack. The industrial base was crumbling. The mathematics of defeat was evident to German planners by mid-1944. They understood that air superiority, not tactical brilliance, would determine the outcome. The Mustang had not merely extended Allied reach. It had removed the geographical sanctuary upon which German strategy depended. By September 1944, the Luftwaffe ceased to function as an effective defensive force. Individual units fought with courage, even skill, but the system had collapsed. The P-51 had won its portion of the air war not through technical superiority, but through operational transformation. It had turned space into vulnerability and vulnerability into defeat. Lieutenant Gentile's aircraft, Shangri-La, bore the distinctive red nose of the 4th Fighter Group. After 27 combat missions, it showed signs of hard service oil stains along the fuselage, patched flak damage, worn paint along leading edges. These fighters, dismissed by early critics as converted pursuit ships, had become the decisive weapon of the air campaign. Naval architect Kelly Johnson, who designed the competing P-38 Lightning, acknowledged the achievement. The Mustang solved the escort problem not with exotic technology, but with brilliant engineering integration. It made the ordinary extraordinary. By October 1944, the cumulative effect was overwhelming. Air superiority had enabled systematic destruction of German oil production. Fuel shortages crippled both the Luftwaffe and ground forces. Transportation networks suffered continuous attack. Industrial output declined precipitously. The strategic bombing campaign, once threatened with failure due to unsustainable losses, now proceeded methodically against diminishing opposition. The P-51 had made this possible not by winning more dogfights, but by enabling bombers to deliver their ordnance accurately against critical targets day after day, week after week. The final proof came in mission statistics. From January through December 1944, the 8th Air Force flew 2,362 bomber sorties to targets previously beyond escort range. The overall loss rate was 4.7% sustainable indefinitely. Escort fighters claimed 5,278 aerial victories while losing 2,520 of their own, a favorable exchange ratio that steadily depleted Luftwaffe strength. The strategic outcome was unambiguous: Allied air superiority over the entirety of German-controlled Europe. This condition, impossible in 1943, became routine in 1944. The transformation was complete. Major Turner reflected on the change during a December 1944 intelligence briefing. 6 months ago, we planned missions wondering if we could reach the target with adequate escort. Today, we plan knowing we can escort anywhere. The question isn't whether, but how many. That's not incremental improvement. It's a revolution. The revolution was not technological, but operational. The P-51 was an excellent fighter, but not dramatically superior to its contemporaries. What distinguished it was its integration into a system that transformed range from a limitation into an advantage. German prisoner interrogation reports confirmed the psychological impact. Luftwaffe pilots expressed disbelief at encountering Mustangs over targets deep in eastern Germany. A captured JG-27 pilot stated, "We were told American fighters had a maximum range of 500 kilometers. When they appeared over Breslau, 950 kilometers from England, we knew something fundamental had changed." That recognition marked the psychological turning point of the air war. The myth of sanctuary beyond escort range had been shattered, never to recover. The final arithmetic was compelling. By April 1945, the 8th Air Force could launch over 1,000 bombers against any target in German-controlled territory, all with continuous fighter escort. The Luftwaffe could muster fewer than 100 operational interceptors to oppose them. The ratio was 10:1 aircraft, but infinite in terms of effective opposition. German air defense had ceased to exist as a coherent system. Individual pilots fought with courage, even skill, but the outcome was predetermined. The force that controlled time, space, and operational tempo controlled the outcome. By spring 1945, that force was indisputably the Allies. Mission manifests stacked on an 8th Air Force operations desk showed the transformation. Mustang groups formed the backbone of escort assignments. Column totals revealed staggering numbers: 546,463 bomber sorties flown by war's end. 21,000 heavy bombers built, each requiring an 11-man crew. 5 million tons of bombs dropped on Axis territories. The contrast was operational. In 1943, a bomber crew faced statistical elimination before completing a 25-mission tour. By 1945, the majority of crews completed their tours and returned home. The difference wasn't better bombers or more courageous crews. It was consistent fighter escort regardless of target location. The connection between escort range and strategic bombing effectiveness was direct. As Colonel Richard Blakesley observed, "Our bombers became accurate when they stopped being afraid. They stopped being afraid when they knew we'd be with them all the way." The arithmetic remains stark. In 1943, deep penetration raids suffered losses of 25% or higher. By 1945, comparable missions experienced rates below 3%. The P-51 hadn't won the air war alone, but it had enabled the strategic bombing campaign to fulfill its potential systematic destruction of German industrial capacity. Captured Luftwaffe documents revealed the scale of defeat. A March 1945 assessment stated, "Allied air superiority is complete and irreversible. No technology available to us can alter this condition. Production declines as factories are destroyed. Fuel scarcity grounds training programs. Skilled pilots are lost without adequate replacements. The Reich has lost control of its own airspace." That recognition came too late to influence the war's outcome. The air campaign had already achieved its objectives: destruction of German industrial capacity and attainment of air supremacy over the battlefield. The P-51 Mustang remains in preserved flying condition at museums and airshows worldwide. The distinctive silhouette, long nose, bubble canopy, graceful lines is immediately recognizable to aviation enthusiasts. These aircraft, built for a specific wartime mission, have become symbols of the engineering innovation that helped win the war. Restoration societies maintain them with dedication. Former pilots and ground crews provide oral histories. Their accounts describe pre-dawn briefings, 7-hour missions, fuel calculations, combat engagements, and the relief of returning to base with empty tanks but mission accomplished. The principles pioneered by Doolittle and Blakesley echoed through post-war decades. Long-range strike aircraft incorporated the same disciplined fuel management procedures, cruise control settings, standardized power curves, and precise navigation became fundamental to military aviation. Modern combat aircraft, despite vastly superior technology, still operate within the doctrinal framework established during those critical months of 1944, when the Mustang transformed the strategic map of Europe. The lessons were operationalized in subsequent conflicts. During the Korean War, F-51 Mustangs, redesignated from P-51 after the creation of the Independent Air Force, operated alongside jets. In Vietnam, combat air patrols protected strike packages using principles developed over Germany. Operation Desert Storm featured precisely coordinated strike packages with dedicated escort elements. The connection between 1944 and modern air operations is direct. The fundamental insight that range equals strategic freedom of action remains valid across technological generations. General James Doolittle, addressing Air Force Academy cadets in 1959, summarized the transformation. The P-51 didn't win the air war by itself. No single weapon ever does. What it did was remove the geographical constraint that limited our strategic options. Before the Mustang, we could reach some targets some of the time. After, we could reach any target, any time. That's not incremental improvement. That's revolutionary change. The revolution was not the aircraft, but the operational concept it enabled. The insight that range equals freedom of action, that escorts must accompany bombers throughout the entire mission, fundamentally altered air warfare. The final lesson was systemic. The Mustang succeeded because it was part of a coordinated whole integrated with bomber operations, supported by maintenance organizations, guided by tactical doctrine, supplied through robust logistics. The aircraft was the visible component, but the system made it effective. As Lieutenant Gentile observed in his post-war memoir, "We didn't outfly the Luftwaffe. Many of their pilots were superb. We outsustained them. We were there when they couldn't be, where they didn't expect us, with more aircraft than they could counter." That's how air wars are won, not by building better fighters, but by employing good fighters better. The Mustang yards at Inglewood are now shopping centres and housing developments. The runways at Debden and Bodney are quiet. The air bases have been repurposed or abandoned. But the legacy remains in every long-range strike aircraft, every escort doctrine, every fuel management procedure that values endurance over raw performance. The revolution endures. What appeared impossible in 1943 escort fighters accompanying bombers to any target in Europe became routine by 1945. The transformation wasn't merely technological, it was conceptual, the recognition that range equals strategic freedom, that presence equals deterrence, that sustainability equals victory. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.